Welcome everyone to the first Friday entrepreneurship call with K-State Research and Extension. And we are just thrilled today to have one of our good partners at K-State is the Kansas Department of Commerce. Remember that we will have a time for sharing after the call. And we welcome you to think about anything that you might want to share with your colleagues. We learn from each other as much as we learn from the speakers. So the call is being recorded, and if you're registered, you're going to get a copy of this call afterwards, but I'll also put the link to where all the videos are in the chat eventually. So without further ado, Kayla Savage is the Director of Community Development with Kansas Department of Commerce, and she is our guest today to talk about rural housing incentive districts. And I was telling people before you joined that we've had 71 new people register for this call, bringing us well over 800 people that are registered. But presumably those were people who specifically wanted to know about this topic. So Kayla, I think there's a lot of interest in your topic.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, if you're ready for me to get started, Nancy, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Make sure everybody can see it. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
We're seeing the notes page right now.
Let me start. How about
there we go? There we go.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One moment here.
I goofed her up by unsharing her. We had this all rehearsed so that it would go smoothly.
Well, let me
see your faces.
Let me try again here. Sorry about this.
That's all right. There. Now we're seeing the right view.
There we go. Are you seeing it now with RHID,
Yes.
a tool for addressing housing gaps?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right. So as Nancy mentioned, my name is Kayla Savage. I am the Community Development Division Director at the Kansas Department of Commerce. And I am here today to share with you about the rural housing incentive districts. And RHID, as we call it, has been around for a while. But I am going to talk about the changes that actually happened last year during the legislative session in 2021 that has really moved RHID into what I would term as a smart growth tool or asset for addressing housing gaps in Kansas communities. So a little bit more here about the housing programs that are actually available through the Department of Commerce. Rural Housing Incentive District Act is really truly a vehicle, as I like to call it, and it's designed for cities and counties to actually assist developers in the building of housing in rural communities. This is really valuable because it essentially makes available capturing the incremental tax value or value on the property to finance either public improvement pieces of the project, of the housing project, or new since last year, upper story development for residential spaces in central business districts. So RHID is essentially, while it's not necessarily a grant program specifically or a loan program, it's really a mechanism to help communities be able to capture that increase on the valuation of the property once the improvement has been made. The other two programs that we have available for housing at the Department of Commerce specifically are community development block grants for housing rehabilitation. Some of you on the call are very familiar with CDBG and are familiar with the housing rehab grants that we have. I want to make a very clear note here that if your community, one of the national objectives for CDBG specifically is benefit to at least 51% low to moderate income persons. And for housing specifically, that means that whoever inhabits the home or does inhabit the home has to be that 51% low to moderate income or greater. Oftentimes communities don't think that they are eligible for community development block grant housing rehab because their automatic LMI percentage that is set, is determined, not set, but determined by the census data, they assume they don't qualify for that program. I want you to know that there are ways to determine benefit and qualification for that program outside of the standard LMI census data. And if you want more information about that, or your community does not automatically qualify with your LMI percentage, please reach out to me and I will get you in contact with our CDBG housing rehab project manager that can assist you with more information about that. Also worth noting, housing rehabilitation for CDBG is also eligible for upper story homes or residential units. So we do have a cap on the max amount per unit, which is $25,000, but it is available for residential upper story rehab and development. And so going right into the next point of another housing program that's available at Commerce is for designated Main Street communities. There's also an upper story residential unit loan program as well. And I know we have some folks from the Main Street organization here today. I can get you in touch with them as well. Also, Commerce is one of 4 very active Kansas housing partners at the state. And so I wanted to make sure I shared this resource page with all of you today because clearly there's an interest in housing. We clearly have needs in housing in our state, and our goal is to make sure that you all are well aware of the opportunities that exist. And Commerce is just one of several agencies that make available housing resources. We house this page that has all of these resources on it. So don't go to it right now, but save it for later. At this site, you will see the myriad of programs that are available through our state agencies or partners for housing. This includes from the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, as I mentioned, CDBG. Also, the RHID resources are on there as well. And we also have Federal Home Loan Bank, which even though the name says federal in it, I want to note it is not a federally funded program. So that's a little bit of a misnomer there. And then the other partner is USDA Rural Development. So those partners come together with Commerce about once a quarter, and we have our housing partners meetings. And we also offer up housing interagency committees that I will talk about a little bit later in the presentation as well. So check out that resource when you have a moment. Just a moment. There we go. Slides aren't advancing like I thought they would. All right, so a little bit more here about RHID. This gets into really the nuts and bolts of what it is, how it works, and who it's for. So this, as the slide says, it's designed, and I mentioned earlier, it's designed to aid developers and communities as they are wanting to address their housing needs. It assists with the improvements of public infrastructure or public improvements, financing of those. And then also, as I mentioned, with residential upper story development too. It captures that incremental increase in the real property taxes that are created by the improvements for up to 25 years. And this is dependent on your local agreement, essentially, that the community will set up and will, negotiate essentially with developers as well. And this is available to any city in Kansas with a population of 60,000 or less, or a county of population of 80,000 or less. So the permitted uses for RHID reimbursements, we do have, this is a list here, but also if you have other expenses that maybe are not on this list specifically, you can reach out to Commerce, as a city or community and check with us and see if those are eligible uses. But again, we're looking at public improvements or infrastructure, things like needing to get a site prepared, sidewalks, the land acquisition costs can also be included. A traditional RHID is typically in what would have been, a brownfield or greenfield, possibly in what would have maybe been a subdivision or could be a subdivision of the community. So things like, the streets, the infrastructure to support that residential area, those are typically the reimbursable expenses under RHID. With the addition of SB 90 last year in the 2021 legislative session, there was a monumental piece added to the RHID mechanism or RHID Act, and that included then the advancing upper story redevelopment as well. So this really made, as I mentioned at the beginning, RHID entered a smart growth tool and asset for our Kansas communities. We are well aware at Commerce that there are many underutilized and dilapidated or just used for storage for a number of years upper stories in our central business districts that are great opportunities for residential units. And again, addressing those housing gaps that exist in our communities. We know that we've got people moving to our communities that need housing, want housing, and this just gave another tool in the toolbox to local communities to attract and also develop relationships with developers. I will note that we've had several communities across the state that have actually successfully submitted new RHIDs or new rural housing incentive districts that have included upper stories in their central business district. So everybody responded, people are responding very well to that. So we're excited about the new opportunities that exist. So a lot of communities, the first question is, how do I get started on creating a rural housing incentive district? Again, this is a mechanism really for the local community to utilize for designed for relationships with developers, and including this as a mechanism for that. So the first step is going to be that a community really needs to put into documented resources or use documented resources to determine their housing needs. So the first step is going to be the creation of the housing needs assessment or analysis, pardon me. We call it an HNA. And some of you may be on the call and maybe have never addressed housing needs, or it's been a while. Maybe the last time you did a survey, it's been 10 years or more. This is really the first step for a community wanting to get started with an RHID. So we've got the list of, the 4 elements essentially that the housing needs analysis needs to address. So, there's a shortage of housing, This shortage is expected to continue. It's impacted the community negatively when it comes to economic development opportunities, community development opportunities. Maybe you have a large employer coming to town or is already in town, and the majority of their employees have to commute because they cannot find suitable housing that meets their needs. And the fourth part is that, you know, we want to know if this shortage of housing is also impacting the future well-being of the city or the community. And this is really needed to address that. I do want to make a note here while we're talking about the HNA, that as soon as we start mentioning things like analysis, oftentimes communities are concerned that they will have to hire out a consultant or, you know, have to spend thousands of dollars to meet this requirement. And we at Commerce want you to know that that is not necessary. And we do have some tools to help you get started if you have not started a housing assessment in the near or in the recent future, if you will. The goal is not to require you to jump through a bunch of hoops to be able to get your RHID set up. But the second step, once you get your housing needs analysis completed, we are also happy to review the housing needs analysis for the community for feedback or input. Myself and then also our chief legal counsel, Bob North, have done that for some of the communities that I mentioned earlier. And we're happy to do that as well. We also have Randy Speaker, housing specialist at Commerce, that is another great resource when it comes to RHID and questions for developers. I'll have their contact information in a slide later on. But if you reach out to me, I'll make sure that you get in contact with them as well. So the second step is the city or county resolution. So this has to be coupled, you know, with the HNA, and there has to be a very clear, you know, public process to both reviewing and then approving the Rural Housing Incentive District. This is very important because this is, again, a local mechanism and a local decision on where that district is going to be and the kind of developments or the kind of housing that you are looking at addressing in that district. Once that is complete, then you will send that up to Commerce. The Secretary of Commerce and Lieutenant Governor David Toland will review that with a small committee as well. And then if those findings, if we agree with the findings, then the next step, then we move on to the next step in the process for RHID. So step 3 for the local community is going to then be the city or county redevelopment plan. So this is where there will need to be the legal description of where this district is going to be located at, what the existing assessed valuations are, and who the owners are of those properties or of those of the land if it's under a traditional RHID. And then also any contractual assurances with the developer will need to be developed during this time. And you want to make sure you also do a feasibility analysis during this process as well. If you have any questions, while this is mainly done on the local level, again, this is completed on the local level, please reach out if you have any questions about any of these 3 steps. If you're taking notes, please know that all of these steps are listed in detail on our website as well. If you go to kansascommerce.gov/RHID, you'll be able to find this page with this information as well. So this was a statutory checklist that was actually created by the city of Emporia some time ago. And well, actually just recently is what I should say, just last fall. It seems like some time ago at this point. But they actually created this checklist for themselves to go through the process, but they have shared it with multiple communities that are interested in getting started in the process. So my appreciation to the city of Emporia for sharing this and then allowing us to share this publicly as well. You know, if somebody comes up with a resource in the mix, we want to make sure that people have that available at their fingertips. There's also then the checklist kind of continues here. These items, of course, are in this presentation, which will be made available to everyone after the presentation as well. And on my next slide, this is where I've got both Bob and Randy speakers information here. So again, Bob is the chief counsel at Commerce, has been there for a number of years. You know, was there when the original RHID was created and was very instrumental in SB 90 as well. Great guy, reach out to him. Both phone number and email are listed there if you have any questions, especially as it relates to any of the legal requirements for RHID or process. And then Randy Speaker has joined our commerce team in the last few months as our housing specialist. And he has a wealth of experience in housing and housing development, and also can be really helpful when it comes to navigating discussions or input from the developer perspective or with developers. And he's actually developed a spreadsheet tool, if you will. If you as a local community are not sure what your specific scenario might look like from a tax perspective, he can assist you with questions related to that as well. And then I'm going to make sure that this group knows that we have a monthly Q&A and technical assistance session with our CDBG team that is available to the public. It's offered virtually every single month. And so it's called the Third Thursdays at 3 with CDBG. And just as it says, every month on the third Thursday at 3 p.m., we have these sessions available via Zoom. You can sign up at our website at this page. If you go to kansascommerce.gov/CDBG, you'll be able to find the information and how to sign up. Our next session is going to be held on Thursday, the 17th of February. And we are focusing, I guess February is all about housing. We are focusing on our housing assessment tool, and also how communities can actually use that, especially if you have not addressed or not studied your housing needs recently. We all know that a lot of changes have happened in the last couple of years. We know that there's a lot of people moving into our rural communities from other states, East, West Coast. I would highly recommend that you start here. If you have not done any housing studies, depending on the size of your community, this is a great place to start, is the housing assessment tool. It is designed so that the local community, even volunteers, can help put it together. It walks you through the process, makes it very kind of user-friendly. It does take a little bit of time if you're going to, really go through the process to bring together your organizations, maybe your groups of volunteers or your civic organizations. This really walks you through that process. We will be adding an online component of the housing assessment tool, which will be reviewed during this third Thursday session on the 17th of February. So if you're not signed up already, I would encourage you to sign up for that. Again, kansascommerce.gov/CDBG. and you can click on the third Thursdays at 3 and sign up on our website. And this is me. This is my information. So again, you can reach me at my email is kayla.savage@ks.gov. My cell phone number is listed right there. And of course, there's our web address as well. And Nancy, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions specific to the presentation or RHID, or turn it back over to you for sharing.
Fantastic. And so Kayla, we do have a couple of questions. Is
Okay.
a hat required before a HNA for the RHID?
No, the hat is not required to complete the HNA. The hat is simply recommended if you have not done any housing needs assessment or walked through any of that yet. But no, the hat is not required for the HNA. The good news is if you complete the hat, that information can be utilized for your housing needs analysis as well. So kind of a pipeline or a step-by-step process, if you will. Complete your hat, then you complete your housing needs analysis with the end goal, of course, of establishing your RHID.
That was a good question because I was struggling with what is HNA. So the housing assessment tool, is the housing assessment tool required before a housing needs assessment?
No, it is. Yeah, that's a good question. It is not. Let me be clear, though, they are two very separate things. Because the housing needs analysis, because RHID is based in state statute, the housing needs analysis is listed in the state statute. So therefore, if you are going to pursue an RHID, you do need to have an HNA completed.
Okay. Are the CDBG third Thursday presentations recorded and posted?
They are not, but essentially what we will do is we will offer a recorded training session on how to use the HAT tool specifically. So while the third Thursdays at 3 is really a live, very interactive, people can take themselves off mute, ask very specific questions. We don't actually record it, but we will have a recorded training session on the HAT tool specifically.
Very good. Okay, two-part question. Do you have statistics on how much has been awarded in Kansas through the RHID program? And second, is there a certain amount available each year?
Okay, so just to clarify, Rural Housing Incentive District is not a grant. So it is essentially a vehicle, if you will, or a mechanism for the local community to capture the incremental property tax on the improvement. So the valuation before the project starts, and then the valuation after the project starts, and then that amount is then reimbursed on the local level to the developer for those specific costs for the housing development. So we do not track at Commerce, we do not track the amount of those reimbursements.
Great. So in other words, there's no limit. It's just whether it qualifies.
Correct. Yes. It's whether it's basically a process to allow the local community to use that as a tool in their toolbox.
Very good. Okay. So Emily asks, is there any idea if and when the Main Street program might accept new applicants? Is that a Commerce question?
It sure is, because Kansas Main Street is part of the Community Development Division at Commerce.
Okay.
So that is a good question, and let's hold on to that question for later on. I like I said, I know some of our folks are here, but from Kansas Main Street, essentially our plan is later on this spring. We'll have an announcement about the newly designated communities. But also, if we have time, Nancy, I'd be happy to give the floor to those folks so they can talk about that if they choose, and if we have time.
Great. Yeah, because there's a string of questions specifically for you too. Can you explain how the upper story RHID works?
Yes. So essentially, and of course, we're kind of in the infancy right now. But essentially what communities have been, doing that have been coming forward with Upper Story is they go through the traditional RHID process that I've already, that I've just outlined. But essentially the qualified expenses for reimbursement for the developer are going to be slightly different than if the housing development was in a brownfield or greenfield. But things like essentially all of the permanent improvements then that have been made to that upper story are going to qualify for reimbursement. So things like the plumbing, the HVAC, if you install an elevator, essentially, the assessor has to evaluate the value of that upper story unit or area before the improvements are made, and then evaluate or assess the value after the improvements are made. And then that's the capture of that incremental property tax is what is then reimbursed to the developer for those project expenses. If the person who asked that question would like to reach out to me directly, I would be happy to get them in contact with a couple of the local communities that are navigating that currently, because they can give you real world examples of how they are handling that.
Kayla, I love that idea because, I think a lot of the value of this call is to introduce ideas and make you aware that these people are very accessible and they want to help you. And so if you learn nothing else from today, I hope that you've learned that. Let's see. So how do RHIDs work with neighborhood revitalization programs? If an RHID is funded through the increase in property taxes, but an NRP is rebating those taxes or a portion of those taxes, it seems like those two programs could conflict with each other. And I have to confess, I'm not thinking what NRP is. So
NRP is very similar to RHID in that it does, collect the increase in the taxes. And Kelly, I see that you've asked that question here in the chat. We are currently looking at that. That is currently, under review or under research, and how those two programs can work together and or potentially be compared, I guess is a way to say that. Depending, it really comes down to where the NRP is located compared to where you are wanting to establish a rural housing incentive district. The main advantage to a rural housing incentive district is that you can be very laser focused in a very particular area of your, of your community, of your county, of your city. And then also the additional advantages of the upper story redevelopment or upper story development for under RHID. There's also, so I know Bob has fielded a couple questions on this. I would highly recommend reaching out to him directly because I know that he is working on that with a couple communities currently.
Good. And that's Bob North, who's the legal counsel. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. In a private message to me is, please explain the tools mentioned to help us write the housing needs assessment. And then a second question, can downtown upper level housing use the RHID and the commercial CDBG at the same time?
So I'm going to answer the last question first.
Okay.
If you're asking about CDBG commercial rehab, that program is specifically focused on redevelopment and rehab of what would be the lower story for commercial use. But it could be for, it could be for the entire building as well. Typically we see in our downtowns, we want to have, the retail or business space in the lower level, and then, above it, some kind of housing as well. And so the quick answer is CDBG commercial rehab can absolutely be paired with RHID for upper story development. Again, one is a grant, CDBG-CR is a grant, and RHID with upper story development is really a mechanism to capture that incremental property tax increase. So the two do not conflict from that perspective at all. And in fact, it would be, it's a great use case for projects that are doing a commercial rehab project under CDBG, and then also utilizing the RHID program to then develop the housing above. Also, has not been done yet, but commercial rehab under the CDBG program can potentially be utilized for, say, residents that is not going to be inhabited by a regular long-term resident. Commercial rehab could apply for the rehabilitation or renovation of that upper story unit. Say you were going to turn it into a commercial residential unit. So commercial as in, say, an Airbnb or hotels, short-term hotel space, something of that nature. CDBG commercial rehab could be part of that project then. That was a pretty detailed question. Would you repeat the question, Nancy? Because I want to make sure I answered it.
Okay, so that the second question that you were answering was, can downtown upper level housing use the RHID and the commercial CDBG at the same time?
I think I answered it. The short answer is yes.
Yes.
Short answer is yes.
The other question is, explain the tools mentioned to help us write the housing needs assessment.
Yes. So if you have not recently, as a city or a county, if you've not recently done any kind of housing study or housing needs assessment locally, we highly recommend that you start with the housing assessment tool, which is the HAT that I mentioned earlier, that we will be reviewing in detail at Third Thursday at 3 with CDBG on the 17th of February. That tool is utilized by CDBG, Federal Home Loan Bank, KHRC, and USDA Rural Development. So all of our partners utilize that for any community that is interested in any of their housing programs as well. That's step number one if you've not even ventured into that area at all. Step number two, or if you have already maybe done an assessment or have a recent study, is going to be that the housing needs analysis really needs to cover 4 parts. And those 4 parts were listed on the slide that I mentioned, and then it's also on our website as well. But really, we need to see that you have determined what the needs are in the community based on, here's what we have available. Here's what we know people need because maybe they're commuting or they live outside of, town, but they would buy a home here or would rent a home here if we had, XYZ. And that, this lack of these options has led to, maybe missed opportunities, or it's creating a strain, evidence of that. And then also, how would, an RHID or this housing district, how is this going to address those housing needs as well? So just off the cuff, that's the parts that we really need addressed in the housing needs analysis. And all of the data sources that you have available to you publicly, or if you have, recently done a survey, it's really encouraged to include those data sources in your housing needs analysis as well. And just a reminder that if you have drafted a housing needs analysis and you would like Commerce to review it and provide some feedback on it, please reach out. We're happy to do that. Generally, that's myself and Bob North. Bob is really great about reviewing those as well.
Great. Kayla, there was a comment here in the chat by James Zaleski, and I asked him to explain his comment. He said that they looked at NRP and RHID, and they cannot be used each for the whole amount. So I asked James, or maybe that's self-explanatory to you.
Yeah, well, and I can build on Jim's comment that essentially gets at the comment that I made about the district. So essentially, there's no benefit to having them overlap. So RHID, if you've already got NRP, RHID is an opportunity for if that NRP doesn't cover a certain area, or again, if you've got if you've got a downtown district that wasn't included in the NRP, then RHID would be an option as well.
We actually had them opt out. The neighborhood for the RHID had to, the developer and the Community Development Corporation simply opted out of the neighborhood revitalization because we wanted the funds to channel towards RHID. Hey, if I could just share something, we really, there is a plethora of information out there. Commerce is doing great on this because so many people are picking up on RHID. But I learned just as much by going to Dodge City, Pittsburgh, Great Bend, and looking at their stuff. It's all available online. It's public, public domain, open, and just looking at. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Dodge has got a lot of great stuff, and there's different ways to do it with the bonding out or pay as you go. I know that's a really in-depth to get into on a webinar, but you can see examples of other people who have done it in the state, and it's makes it a lot easier.
That's a great observation. Jim, where are you from?
Labette County, Parsons.
Okay, very good. That's good. Now we know who to copy from.
Well, I'm copying from somebody else, so.
That's right.
Yeah, Jim brings up a great point, though. Those are some of the local resources that, like I said, we'd be happy, to get you in touch with. He commented specifically about Dodge City. They have done a lot with RHID and have done a really great job. And he mentioned some of the other ones as well. And like I said, Emporia is the one who gave us the checklist. And so they've done some traditional RHID, but then they also were an early adopter and supporter of SB 90 as well. And very active with some projects in their downtown too. So that's another resource. Again, would be happy to connect anybody on this call with the direct contacts in there as well. So that's a good point, Jen.
Kayla, in our pre-talk, Kayla mentioned, because we're talking about doing a grant workshop for somebody, and she mentioned the fact that we really are not competing with each other, and it's so true, especially in this case. But I mean, anytime somebody comes and says, "I've been told you're doing a great job," it's like, well, yes, thank you. I'd be glad to tell you. I mean, people are generous, and we all want to share our success and what we've learned or our failure. I mean, as somebody said, you can't make all the mistakes. Find out who's already done it and don't make that one.
Yeah. Nancy, my experience has been that with Kansans, we are humble people. So we typically don't think that what we're doing is anything special or helpful. But you'd be amazed at how much we can learn from each other. So
absolutely. I'm
glad that Jim made that comment and could share that information about very specific experience that they've had as well.
Yeah, it makes it real.
Yeah.
Okay. So we still have time, but I do want Kayla, thank you. That was awesome. And we learned a lot. And we also learned that Kayla is very accessible, and she knows other nice people in her office who will help you. And so do call on them. They want, Commerce wants us. Commerce is only as successful as the individual communities are. So your success is their success, and they want to help you be successful. So, all right. So who has something that they'd like to share? I'll warm you up again. Just to let you know, we're planned. K-State Research and Extension has planned 5 grant writing workshops this year. The next one is March 29th and 31st. They are all virtual now. We're doing them on Zoom, and you can sign up and pay. It's $60 for each one. You can sign up and pay at the website in the chat. People have asked, and we will have all of the Kayla's slides and the recording. We usually have them on the website by the end of the day, and I gave you that website too. So who else has something to share? Anybody? Anybody have a housing success you want to share to encourage the rest of us? I was reviewing, Victor Wang was the vice president of entrepreneurship at Kaufman, and he noted that all of the new jobs come from new businesses, and only 3 people out of 1,000 will create a new business. And yet the work that the other 997 do creates the possibility that they can be successful. So if there are no houses in a community, then new jobs can't be created. So it just all works together. One more chance to share. Anybody? Next month, our oh, I lost my chat. I want to show you where to find out what the new, there we go. In our events page, we list all the, oh, Rachel, I'll call on you just a second. We have a list of all the topics for the first Fridays and for the grant workshops on our events page. Rachel, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. My question was, like, when it comes to trying to put in multifamily housing, we're running into an amount of NIMBYism. And I was wondering if other communities are finding success in combating that by building the upper story housing as multifamily housing. Or if that's still running into, I mean, it'll vary by community, I guess, but just kind of wanted to know how it was working out.
Rachel, I heard this from a local community recently, and I shared my experience that when I was in between jobs, I was looking to go into a small community to be a fundraiser for a local university. And I didn't want to commit by purchasing something, and all the housing there was income eligible. Well, I was going to have a decent income with another person with an income in my, so I was happy to live in multifamily housing. I was happy to live in an apartment, but there weren't any apartments there that I would live in. And so I didn't even take the interview. There were no apartments for anybody but income eligible people. And so I didn't take it. I don't know if that answer, it might, I guess what I'm suggesting is it might simply be not to make it income eligible specifically, but just about affordability or professional housing.
Nancy, to comment, to add on to what you're saying, another term that we've heard, that's gotten some feedback one way or another is the term workforce housing. And it's not always what it sounds like. And that's, I guess, what we're kind of edging into that conversation right now. And specifically at Commerce, the person that is, kind of dealing with that essentially from a both community and developer perspective, because he's been out on the road a lot, is Randy Speaker in our office, who is our housing specialist. And I mentioned he has a lot of experience with housing. And Rachel, I'd be happy to get you connected with him so that, if there's examples that he can provide, or kind of help through that process, and kind of navigate that, if you will, he would be a great resource, I think, to get you in touch with. And Rachel, I think I've got your email address, so I'd be happy to, like I said, make that connection. And for anybody else that's interested in that as well.
Kayla, can you see Kelly's question? A comment?
Yes.
I'm not sure what 5/1 is.
Yeah. If Callie can take herself off mute and maybe speak to, I can only see part of her.
Okay.
I can only see part of her message.
Kelly, are you able to unmute? So it says,
I think you
there we go.
Can you guys hear me now?
There we go.
So a 5/1 or a 4/1 is where it's one row of businesses on the ground level and then 4 levels of apartments above it. And it's almost like a formula at this point that developers are using. They have this down, and it just keeps hitting almost a sweet spot in zoning codes because it's not too dense and not too tall, so it hits floor area ratios pretty easily. But in the end, it all looks like the same cookie cutter apartment building going up all over, and a lot of people are starting to catch on to that, and they don't like how it looks in their neighborhood. They don't like how it's not blending in. So when we talk about adding density into these urban areas, it gets a little bit more difficult when the architecture looks so new, and when there's amenities that don't match, or they provide so many amenities in its own apartment building that it encourages people to not visit the neighborhood amenities that are provided within the neighborhood. So the apartment itself becomes almost like a hub, and they don't venture in the neighborhood. They just stay within their apartment buildings and they don't go out. And so that's something that I've seen here a lot in the Kansas City metro. Another thing that we have with multifamily housing that's a big issue is that people are provided parking, and they include that parking in their ratios and whatnot, but they're leaving out the fact that they charge for this parking. So here in QCMO, I think the last time in my last apartment, I paid $75 a month for a parking spot. So if you know that you're paying $75 a month for a parking spot, upwards to $200 or $250 a month in a parking spot in some areas, you're going to not use that parking space, and you're still going to crowd downtown. So parking is provided, but it's not being used or underutilized because it's an additional rent. And so neighbors are seeing that they're still having overcrowding issues. So that's giving more and more pushback, because the way they see that is more parking density when you're paying for it is it's still more cars on the street because they're not using those spaces that are being provided because of their cost. Another thing that we see is the type of architecture that goes into these older neighborhoods. When we start to gentrify them, it becomes very obvious, and this is kind of just reiterating my point, when you have a really modern building going into maybe a more historic neighborhood, which the historic neighborhoods are probably more commonly your mixed-use neighborhoods where they've got the 2-overs or the 3-overs flats. So then when they go in and then they put something in that looks super modern, that really takes away from the original character of the neighborhood, and it's very obvious the income of the person who lives in that $1,500 a month apartment downtown, because that's about what you're at here in Kansas City for a single bedroom. It's $1,500 a month. and then you have to pay the additional $75 to $200 for your parking space. So when you're walking into a building and you're paying that much, but you're right next to a building that might be a $850 a month building, all of a sudden you're, because it's an older historical use that might not even provide parking at all of a sudden your rental costs have changed for that area. And, so it's very obvious who's walking into what building at that point. So making the building's architecture and composition kind of merge better into what the existing neighborhood is, and providing less amenities in the apartment building itself and more incentive to go out into the public is what we find around here that has some of the better successful developments. So it's great that you can provide your own pool and you can provide your own playground and you can provide your own dog park and all these other things. But if you already have a dog park down the street, they want you to use the one in the community. If you have a neighborhood swimming pool, go visit the neighborhood swimming pool and use those tax dollars there. We don't want to give you a tax incentive for a pool when we already have one in our neighborhood. So those are the kind of things that we find people up here being more concerned about. And we did a big recording of what we call 3-light apartments up here. And it was an interesting point someone made about there. It was supposed to feature all these great artists and local work from around the city, but they couldn't even afford to live in the own building that the local work was being presented in because of the cost.
Yeah.
I believe on the upstairs of this building, it was $15,000 a month rent for the penthouse. And that's just like $15,000 a month for rent. And so it's very obvious to those people where they live, even if it's a new building in an old neighborhood. So that was one of the things that, we find when dealing with multifamily housing, to come up with strategies, even if they are receiving tax monies or not.
Right. Yeah. Almost a different but related kind of with the NIMBY, concept. It's a little bit different than what maybe Rachel was mentioning, but yeah, that is definitely concern. And I don't know, Callie, I'm not intimately familiar with the, the policies and how Kansas City has handled that. I don't know if it's on a, neighborhood basis or citywide, but yeah, that would be, that's very challenging for sure.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of more questions. People have a lot more. We won't be covering news topics today, but where can we find information about moderate income housing grants?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Moderate income housing grants are actually administered and awarded by the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation. So if you go to KHRC, they have more information there on their website and that process. And that is currently being considered in the legislative session right now as well, the MIH program. But I would reach out to them directly if you have questions about that.
Great. And that was a previous call too. So I'm going to suggest that Tiffany, who is asking the question about, can you address assessment of long-term success and benefits of these programs to a community? And I'm going to suggest that she contact you to find out where those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Would be glad to have a conversation with you, Tiffany.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm going to call this to a close. And I always like to leave you with a thought to consider. Today's thought for the day is the bottom line is, in life, sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen. But honey, if you don't take a chance, nothing happens. And that's from Golden Girls, Dorothy B. Arthur. Create a great Kansas day, and thanks for joining us.